Try and get woke while baby sleeps. Oh yeah.
Welcome to the pilot of Try and Get Woke When Baby Sleeps. My first guest is Loreen Targos. Loreen is a freedom fighter living in Chicago. She is a proud member of the Democratic Socialists of America and a steward with AFGE Local 704, representing U.S. EPA scientists, engineers, attorneys, and staff. She is currently in struggle for liberation from American white supremacist, capitalist tyranny, and invites you to join her. Loreen, what a cool bio. How are you in life?
Good. How are you doing?
Okay, so I think where I'd like to start talking specifically is my Facebook post that prompted a lot of liberal notes that were pretty harsh and pretty Sam, you're part of the problem.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll explain where this post initiated before we deep dive into the problems of it. I had posted a lot, really, I think since Mike Brown, because I went to high school with the guy that shot Mike Brown. So it was a very, that was probably the first time actual killings felt so real for me. In college, I was pretty proactive with I was the president of the student body, and I worked really hard to make sure we kept our Black Student Alliance seats on Senate, and but it didn't feel as important, I guess. It felt important. It didn't feel life or death. And then when it felt life or death for me was, not for me, but for when I realized that it still was life or death for Black people, was Mike Brown. So from that point on, I was pretty shunned by all of the police officers and police officer wives that I grew up with. And it didn't really faze me. I didn't think about I cross a bridge, or I didn't really think about having empathy for them. I just kind of thought you're bad. And I didn't really have, that's what I kind of thought. But then recently I've had a few friends from high school posting stories and commenting on my stuff about just how hard their jobs are, and how these police officers do their husbands and their uncles and things dedicate their lives to this, and all these really wonderful heroic stories that felt like maybe they are one of the good guys, and they too are victims of this system that they, when you're a young kid, you don't think through maybe your full career vision and all of that. And, when you're a local town person, you don't, and the only Black people that you experience, it doesn't feel like a racist thing. Because I don't know, we had my cousin Liz kind of became a sister of mine because her parents died when she was a teenager, and she married a Black man, and they have 5 kids. And so Nick and their 5 mixed kids have always been just to us, family. So I think my family and close friends and church growing up friends have such a hard time. Well, my family still has such a hard time seeing that different Black people have different experiences in different cities. And so it doesn't feel real, I think, to the people I grew up with, basically. And I feel like I need to, because I get it, I grew up with them, now exposed to a lot of different things, and just trying to learn as much as I can. I feel this, I feel very compelled to try to be some kind of a bridge for those conversations.
Totally.
But this post proved that it was really hard to try to do that and try to show compassion for all life without having maybe full understanding of why different pieces of rhetoric are offensive to one group or another, and how there's so much loaded meaning that I don't even know to certain things. And it proved to be challenging. And so I need to get better and figure out how. I feel like I've seen a lot of my liberal actor friends specifically just denounce all racists in their lives, unfriend them publicly, and call them out for all of their racist behaviors. And I get that impulse for sure. I just feel like that impulse ends everything. Not as drastically as a literal life being ended, but it still ends the potential for that person who has goodness in them. We all do, and has a brain in their head and feet in their shoes and all of that. It feels like we're cutting people off a lot as soon as they disagree with us. And I just don't think we're going to make a lot of progress if we do that. So I need to find the post, but if you want to talk while I look.
Yeah, like what you're saying. Like, you know, we live in a system that's institutionalized racism, right? So there's a reason that you, as a good white person, are bewildered and don't have the tools in which to dismantle this systemic racism, because you're an individual who's a part of this system, and they did not teach you the history of what slavery really was. You know, they did not teach you the history of police, which the history of police is that they were started in the North to break strikes when they were, you know, oppressing workers, and workers would fight back. They created the elite, created a police force to hold the workers accountable to go back to work or allow scabs in or whatever they had to do. And in the South, the police were created to hunt down slaves who escaped.
Right.
Police were always used as a tool by the elite to oppress workers. And so you kind of have you have the kings and their knights, and the police kind of serve in that role. So you think of like, oh, I'm a good police officer, I would never do anything wrong. And then you see, you have instances of where good police stood aside, even like one of the police officers who was involved in the George Floyd thing, has Black heritage. And he's like, if you saw a woman confronted him in the grocery store, and he was just so like ashamed of himself.
Yeah.
And, you know, he never thought he'd be the face of white supremacy. But you find that as an individual within a white supremacist system, you become a cog without knowing it. And by the time you're in it, it's like sometimes it's too late to get out. You have to change your whole life. There are myriad ways that it keeps you rooted in that, right? So this these officers, they think they're going, like, I can imagine, like, some officers are like full-on racist, and they're the ones who actually, that's the funny thing, the racist white supremacist police officers, they're the ones who truly understand what their job is all about. There are most people in the United States are good. They do not want to perpetuate racism. That's why it's been institutionalized by powerful people, to make sure that no matter what you want, even though you're a white person, no matter what you want, we're going to have our power.
Yeah.
And you will not be able to stop it. So when a white person realizes, oh, I want to change this, there are so many more obstacles they have to come down besides just saying, I want this. And that's what oppression is. Like, we are collectively oppressed.
So the police, it does feel like it is the 1% that is kind of pulling all the strings, and we're just kind of fighting amongst each other and not making any progress. But how do you, like, the cop that started out as a beat cop, like just a kid from whatever, who kind of becomes more racist and like lets that all kind of affect him, and then gets into a position of power, and then becomes that person that does know that he has to keep his power, and he knows what he's doing. He knows that this is all a fucked system. How do you get to that person versus like the person that truly doesn't know, but like the moment they knew anything, they would probably quit their jobs and join the Black Lives Matter movement, or like just take all of the hazing they would get for being a part of the Black Lives Matter movement while staying a cop? Like, how do we get to those people and to their hearts?
So for like let's say we have the person who's like making $200,000 as a high up cop, they're in this system. They either need to really believe in ending white supremacy it needs to be a sincerely held value of theirs, not through bullying or anything. They should come, and they need to have a relationship. Relationships are a key radicalizing point in this. So I could go to that cop, but part of white supremacy is dehumanizing the other, right? Yeah. That's why these comedians go on TV and they go, oh, I hate people. And everyone goes, haha, I hate people too. And it's like, you should love people. That should not be the case. And the reason we hate people is because we have an individualistic society that pretends like we're not interconnected. And we actually are. And relationships are what keep us interconnected in spite of that oppression. We still have relationships, even though they try to create, like, I think monogamy is a part of oppression. Like, we can talk about that in a whole other thing, but like, we create these silos. But if you look at historical human evolution and how societies evolved, people had multiple sexual partners and yada yada. And so So it was harder to dehumanize somebody when you fucked half the town. And like they had this concept called now I'm getting into it even though I said I wouldn't. But they had this term called partible paternity or something. It would be like a woman who's like I want my son to be strong like that guy, brave like that guy, intelligent like that guy, and she'd fuck all three of them, and all three of those dudes would feel like they were partial fathers to that child.
That's great.
And so you have like, and so everyone is like, oh, this like they would feel paternal feelings to like half the kids in the town. And if they weren't half the kids in there that they had fucked, it's that their brother fucked or someone, you know, so they're uncles and aunts to everybody. Or
what
father and mother.
What time period was this and what town?
If you read the book Sex at Dawn by Christopher something, it talks some of these societies still exist, but they're like super oppressed.
Sex at Dawn, DAWN.
Yeah, I think that's like in this closet. I won't be able to find it, but let me Google it. Sex at Dawn. Yeah, so if you read that, by Christopher Wright. Sex at Dawn. Yeah, so that those relationships. Now we're in a society where our relationships are much more segregated and siloed, but those relationships still exist. So like if my dad was like the chief of police in Ferguson, right, and he's a white dude, and he's racist, does he love me enough to stand up to all that institutional power? Often it's no. Like that's why you'll see like in other forms of oppression, you'll see parents disowning their own gay or LGBTQ children because it's like their love is not enough to overcome the systemic oppression. And so let's like it be rare instances when somebody like stands up to it once they've gotten that far, because they've gotten that far because they've already made those concessions along the way. You know? So to have to go back and be like, wow, I've been a racist pig for 20 years versus no, it's like that's Principal Skinner meme. It's like, no, it's the children who are wrong.
Well, that's the thing. I don't think there's an awareness that I see that, like, I feel like it's hard for anybody to be like I have to admit that I am also racist and I have to look for ways that I am and that I just have problematic thoughts and views in general. But so I feel like it seems like the people, unless they're just really good sociopathic rhetoric people and they just can convince you that they really believe this, but the people I've spoken to and heard speak, they really authentically believe that what they're doing is right. Like, no, everyone thinks they're the hero. They don't think they're wrong. They think like that they look at statistics and say like black people are more likely to be dangerous, and so this makes sense that we are killing black people over, like we still kill white people, but more black people are bad. So there's not this belief that they're racist. There's this belief that black people are worse.
Yeah, so let's say that high up cop is like irredeemable. Like it would take a Herculean effort to change them, right? Well, like we know that there's only a finite amount of energy that we have as a society, and as an individual person, we only have a finite amount of energy, right?
Right.
So most of the people are not like that police chief. Most people can move. Like your 2-year-old beat cop, whatever. Like that's a person. Like that's where we should be focusing our energy, because the change always comes from the bottom up. And so we can say, oh, if only I could convince the mayor to stop being a white supremacist. Yeah, but the mayor probably became the mayor because they're committed to white supremacy in a very like strong way. Like if so it's better to sort of go to the low-hanging fruit and organize that. So like go to the people who say Black Lives Matter. But then they, like, for example, I could say you're low-hanging fruit, right? Because you are like, and I am too. Like, I wasn't a red diaper baby with like woke parents. Like, I had to learn this stuff too. And it was like, I was so personally, like, it felt like such a betrayal. So, yeah, he was like, it violated my values so deeply. And so if you find somebody who's like, they're not performatively saying Black Lives Matter, they truly are heartbroken by what happened to Mike Brown, by what happened to George Floyd, and they really want to understand like how good, like we have all the people around us are good people. They would never allow horrible things to happen, that Jeffrey Epstein to do all these things, but somehow it continues. How? Because we have the power and we're not using it because we're oppressed. So we need to take our power back. And so going to people, like let's say the two of us are talking, right? And we want to get free. We can educate each other and start
talking to people in our networks, right? You can talk to
people who, like, let's say you have, like, your whole, let's say, this isn't the case, but let's say, like, your whole family is, like, racist. But you have, like, two cousins who are, like, the child of, like, your most racist Uncle Bob, who are, like, we know our dad's big-ass racist. And, like, but isn't it true that black-on-black crime, but, like, Black Lives Matter, but, like, why do they keep killing each other, whatever. If there's progress to be made, if they're, like, some people will root themselves and you'll give them evidence that black on black crime is a bullshit racist thing, and they won't listen. They'll listen, then you can try with them to a certain point, but if they're not listening, then you're not going to get it. So you have to get people who are like, I want to understand. I understand that white supremacy is not true.
Right.
And I am committed to learning. And so it's like about reading articles and
talking about it and watching the 13th and watching other movies and talking about it and being like, how is it that, look at our institution. Why don't we learn about the 13th? Why don't we learn about the Tulsa Massacre? Why don't we learn about the history of police? Because racism is institutionally perpetuated.
Yeah, so it feels like there are no solid institutions that I know of, but I truly feel like listening to KPCC for most of my day, or just NPR for most of my day, I've been doing that since a little bit after college, I think is when I started listening, and it's impossible not to be aware of what's going on in the world, and you're getting conservative and liberal perspectives. Like, they do a pretty good job of giving you a wide range of discussion topics. So it feels like there are institutions that help people get woke without it being this like culty, shoved down your throat, opposite of what you learned as a child kind of thing. But it's just, how do you get those people to listen? Because I just actually had an acquaintance from my childhood church message me and asked me to listen to, she said she would listen to the history of policing I've been posting about, the Behind the Bastards podcast, which is just phenomenal. Like, this guy's a genius, and he knows every single, history research is so, like, hard for me. I don't remember even my own birthday. Like, I'm so bad at dates, but she recommended I do.
When you learn it narrative, it's possible,
When you what?
When you learn history more as a narrative versus like memorizing stuff, it becomes a lot possible.
Yeah. So she recommended that she said, I'll listen to your podcast, to the history of policing, Behind the Bastards. I recommend to everybody. It's a 4-part series. I think it might be longer, but so far it's 4 episodes. And she said, if you commit to listening to either Ben Shapiro, Candace Owens, or Turning Point USA.
Oh my God.
So I asked her to specifically, if those people have like specific talks on the history of policing, then I will listen, and then I'll have her on this show, and we'll have a discussion about the different views that we're learning. And I get messages from my All Lives Matter acquaintances that are things like Black Lives, like they say that Black Lives Matter was started by Democrat puppeteering people who just like want votes and want to keep people down and want to keep people having abortions, and there's all of these conspiracy theories on every side of this like crazy hexagon we have. So there's all of these like deep founded beliefs different people have that I just don't know, because I pretty much follow my gut and my heart, and I think I'm like I'm a reflective person who's trying to just do what's right and very open and malleable to whatever like kind of my gut tells me is right. Like, facts don't always sway me, and it seems like that's the way most humans actually are, no matter how logical they want to claim to be. How to have productive conversations when it does spiral out of control and become so much about hatred. Like, I can't find the post, but like my posts, like from people that I agreed with, I was getting really hateful comments, and I understood the anger for sure, and I feel that anger too, but it just felt like we're just fighting down here in the whatever, while the skyrise rich people like watch and laugh and keep counting their money. And I don't know how to, like, with people you agree with, if you can't even like have a nice lovely conversation with them, I don't know how to do that with people that like strongly disagree in a truly productive way, like and in a way that like uses my energy and limited finite time and all of that. Like, I want it to be an optimized decision. Like, I want to really figure out where I can be effective and then go for that, instead of just being all over the place with like all the ways I want to help, but maybe it's not really moving anything forward.
Like, you are in a tremendously challenging environment. I hope you acknowledge that. Like, you are, right? Because like I've been yelling at my family about racism since 2004. White family, and some of them are still unreachable. So some people will just be unreachable, but some people aren't. And it's kind of like, as you learn, you'll learn to differentiate and see where it's worthwhile to spend your energy. And like, in terms of so one thing that you were talking about, liberals and conservatives, right? This too. Conservatives, you can sort of because of this, right? I sent you a video on Facebook on Messenger about Malcolm X speaking about liberals. And I see you moving, but
sorry, Loreen, it cut the last 2004 of your family.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in 2004.
You've been yelling at
yeah, so I've been yelling at my family about 2004, but then since 2004. And some people are just hard to reach. But going back, you had talked about liberal versus conservative. I want you to add like fascist, conservative, as I understand it. Okay. Because there are people who, like, in the United States, we don't really learn about American fascism. We don't learn much about the Confederacy. We learn a lot about Hitler. And Hitler, actually, if you read about like what Hitler did, he studied American oppression to leverage it on the Jewish people, the leftists in Germany. So he was using American models. Like, the Holocaust went on for what, like 5 or 6 years? How long we're still not out of ours, Police you talk to and stuff. It's true, like, Dave Chappelle, actually, a lot of people shit on Dave Chappelle. I think he has an interesting perspective to this. Like, I'm obviously like more woke than him, but he thinks about this he's an older generation, whatever. But he, like, when he still hasn't really talked about like what he did in South Africa. But in some of his specials, he talks about, in South Africa, they did truth and reconciliation. And that's what we need to do. Like, we need to get to a point where people who believe Black Lives Matter, we need to get to a certain point where it's like, well, what are you going to do with your power? Support truth and reconciliation. Even if you're white, even if you don't really understand on truth and reconciliation about the legacies of slavery, the legacies of Reconstruction, which is what happened right after the Civil War, where I haven't, but I own it, by Ta-Nehisi Coates, but who's like more of a liberal, which I'm a leftist, but he talks about 8 years or however many years after Reconstruction, when Black people were building themselves up. Dave Chappelle's great-grandfather was an elected like leader who met with Woodrow Wilson during that time. He is the Black elite of South Carolina. And then after that, after Black people started rising, they burned it to the ground, right? And they instituted Jim Crow. And then, like, Tulsa had migration start from the South to the North for Black people. Why would they leave their homes? Why would millions and millions of Black people leave their rooted places where they had land and yada yada? Because there was crazy white terrorism going on. The Great Migration was the Great Refugee Crisis. We should really, like, part of Truth and Reconciliation should be renaming that. So in 1915, they leave this. They begin to leave the South. When did people start emigrating to Chicago? 1916. When did the race riots start in Chicago? 1919. So it's like these dates are part of a narrative that just give you perspectives, but it's really important to understand the story, And so, like, in 1919, and then once Black people came here, we made it a more respectable, legal type of racism. We had redlining, segregation, funding all their shit, Black Wall Street race riots where we burned shit down in their neighborhoods. The movie Birth of a Nation came out in 1915, and they did showings at the White House for the movie. That's where the burning of the cross came, because theatrical way to, like, everything that was going on then, like the statues that were being erected. We're tearing those statues down now. And, it is simple. If we had BIPOC people having institutional power, they would have torn those statues down a long time ago. And even though we have tokens, and that's the thing, that's what liberals love to do. And if we want to move forward in this conversation, people need clarity about what liberals are. Because liberals are part of the problem too. So I sent you that video on Malcolm X, you can watch it. But like, guy in South Carolina who endorsed Biden, nobody gets more money from the pharmaceutical industry than Jim Clyburn, who's a black leader, black congressional caucus, all that stuff. But who is it that like elevated a segregationist to be president? You think it's like Jim Clyburn knows that Biden isn't going to get us free. But the thing is, Jim Clyburn is a liberal who doesn't believe in freedom. That's the thing. Whenever they say, like, when they were saying Bernie Sanders can't win, right? Like, let's put aside, like, whatever criticisms of Bernie. Let's pretend Bernie was the revolution, right? Mm-hmm. When they were saying Bernie can't win, we don't want a revolution, they're not saying you don't want a revolution. They're saying we will successfully oppress your revolution. They're not saying they're saying we will stop you because we are certain, because we have that power and you are oppressed and we will keep you oppressed.
Right, so it seems like there's constantly calling each other out for things like that, for this sort of half-assed tokenism and just sort of insincere belief system that just benefits them and the elite versions of them. And then the leftists and the fascists are like about what the truest version of those ideologies. And so I think I would consider myself a leftist, because every time I learn a new thing, like I was raised by evangelical Christians, and the moment I learned about the Muslim faith in elementary school, I was like, hold up, this sounds so familiar to like how I started. Like Abraham was God's chosen whatever, and then he had Ishmael and he had Isaac. It's like they're both chosen. So why are we fucking fighting still if like God chose us all? Like that feels like that shouldn't be a problem. So it feels like every time I learn a more, and throughout my life learning, like I did Bible quiz. My parents were the national Bible quiz champions. Like it's like I've read the Bible. I like know these things, and I studied theology in college, and I just feel like I'm constantly, my instinct is always like I feel more left and progressive than I've ever been able to like fully, and my family and like older friends often think that I've just been brainwashed, which feels like I don't, like, just the logic feels so hard to like get past, because I'm like, if you agree that I'm a pretty smart person and a very reflective person, and I'm always evolving and changing, it doesn't make sense that I'm being brainwashed, because there isn't like you said, an institution that could the same problems left the fascists and conservatives believe side to be true, that we're all being used and puppeteered, but just for opposite causes, kind of. But really, it feels like all the same. It's just like for money and power. So how, right. Like, I don't know how to.
Well, like, I go through those conversations with like trying to like so here's the thing. Here's our going into our media, right? NPR is actually like one of the worst stations, right? NPR really? Is super. Yeah, they're like so right wing. They're not even liberal, but we can go into the nuts and bolts of all that. If you go to NPR and see who they're funded by. They're funded by the Koch brothers, big corporate, the same people who are funding Mitch McConnell and shit. So, you left an abusive relationship after being blind for so long, and this is, or even after being oppressed for so long, you had no place. Like, how do they oppress you? They remove housing as a choice. So if your husband's beating you, you either sleep in the street or you stay at home and walk on eggshells, and you hope you don't get your ass beat. And so right now you're seeing rising against that gaslighting. For so long they've been, oh, we're going to reform, oh, we're going to ban chokeholds, oh, we're going to do this. Like, fuck you, Black Lives Matter. We're doing it now. Defund, abolish, end this shit. And that's why you're seeing so much, like, explosion in the streets right now. And whenever your screen, like, freezes, I, like, slow down. Oh, were you just talking? I can hear you. Okay.
Oh, man. I didn't hear you because another text paused due to poor connection. Oh, man.
I hear you now. Okay, we're connected again. Cool. So,
it's
can you hear me
spiraling.
now?
Okay. So to me, I get the impulse again to burn down and start afresh, but it feels like in burning it down and starting
yeah.
afresh,
So, but we were saying
we're still hurting people. It's just different people, and it feels like we're just going to keep repeating history, but different reactionary. Sorry, did you hear any of that?
We were going to keep.
I look frozen.
If we burn it all down, you were saying if we were going to burn it down, we're going to hurt other people.
That's right. It feels like to defund the police and the plans to put in place. I feel like it's how to manage. I've never really thought before this about how to manage safety and public safety. Keeping people who might also learn. I'm going to get, like, we're all doing all of these things out of fear, and it just feels like we're never going to make any progress, really, any actual progress, if we keep doing this. If we keep doing this fear-based, isn't an overreaction, really. Like, it makes sense that it's our impulse, but we are evolved humans who are capable of, like, forgiving each other.
Thing talking about, like, one thing is, like, with the conversations that you have with, like, regular people, one of my first things I like to do is, like, root it in values. So, like, if you're coming to a conversation with a person, first, root where you agree. We agree that Black Lives Matter. We agree that systemic racism exists. We agree that there's a lot of history that we don't know as white people and Black people. Like, all people grow up with a white supremacist education. The people who learn are people who had to do that outside of institutions, who got books or had parents told them or things like that. And so, like, finding these common things you can agree on are a basis for having progress in your conversation. And then as far as, like, you know, with the defunding the police and stuff, I think that we can burn it down in a way, but I think we have different understandings of what the it is when we're talking about to the goals and reinvesting in other things. So there is a role for police in society, but, like, there might not be a role for, like, a $300,000, you know, guy orchestrates, you know, where to send going to be gang war, because we, you know, and instead more like mental health stuff and, like, really, because the reason police are needed is because poverty exists. And are you hearing? Are you hearing me?
I'm hearing. It's choppy, but I'm getting it. Like I think I.
Yeah, poverty is an expensive thing. It doesn't make financial sense. Like, for example, I give you an example of my neighborhood, right? Chinatown. So there are a bunch of, like, mentally ill, mostly Black, homeless people who live under the viaduct in Chinatown. They don't live under the viaduct in Bridgeport, but that's where Irish live, and they drive them out. Dollars, like, every time the police go out there to hose them down and push them out like they're rats, like they're animals, you know? A drug addiction counselor over to them. But why don't we do that? Because having homelessness, having poverty is profitable for the very elite. It's not devastating poverty. And those are the people who racism in our media, racism in our, you know, racism isn't perpetuated by accident. There's a white relative own media put a Black looking like shit TV going, this is a criminal, this is a criminal, this is a criminal. You live in the suburbs where people were redlined, and so they don't actually personally know many Black. So all they see, you create a bias. It's systemic, it's not an accident. And so we could stop it by like chopping off the head of Jeff Bezos, chopping off the head of whoever owns Sinclair, and me owning CBS and creating programming that's like 1 hour talk with Sam Howard and racial and social problems. But there's no money in that for the people who control everything, which is why like this problem, there's no money in the solution bring, except for the people who are oppressed, which is why we need to educate ourselves. And there's this book I'll send you. It's called The Pedagogy of the Oppressed by Paulo Freire. Have you heard? So he talks about he was an educator in rural Brazil in like the early 1900s, and he worked so effective that he was exiled from the country by the 1%. But his books still exist, and like that is how a lot of these. That's why you've seen teachers be at the forefront of like the revolution. They were striking in 2018 for better wages and getting investment in public schools. Why were they doing that? Because a lot of them have read Pedagogy of the Oppressed. They understand that educators are the liberators in many ways. Workers are the liberators. The people who are because they see their students. They see that their students are oppressed. They see their students don't have choices that white people have. Because, I mean, in these urban schools and whatever. But, like, in all schools, like, in almost every mother. Like, if you talk about what is socialist feminism, it's your child is one day going to grow up and work for a rich man to make him money, right? Yet, are you being compensated for the, like, if the rich man wanted to create 100 robots for his factory, he would have to pay for those robots. But if he needed 100 workers, he would just steal the labor of 100 mothers and take their workers and extract profit from the labor of their bodies. And do you get compensated for that? Does society get compensated for that? No. They get all the value without paying any of the costs for what it costs to create that person. And it's a crime. But it's not a crime that a police clap for mothers. Pay mothers.
Yeah.
Pay all the fucking work you do fucking wearing a fucking diaper. I'm gonna be even more mad once I am a fucking mother, Like that is the level of anger that's needed from the oppressed. Every single one of the oppressed. White mothers are oppressed too. Every mother is oppressed unless they're sitting on their ass having workers do their bidding. That's what like you have the master and the workers. That is there's nobody who's not guilty in this or not completely. Workers must educate themselves. You can never have Medicare for all. You can never have these. They're saying you will never be free. That's what they're saying. Right. That's what they're saying. And so high expectations is like understanding all that, but then like even if you haven't read all, and I certainly haven't read all the books. I just am very mouthy about the things that I particularly know about. But if you root the conversation in like
where we agree,
root it where you agree, because that's like our media again. That method of conversation and communication is not taught because they want the masses to keep fighting. They want you to do family, and so for people of color and like liberals or whatever who say like, "Oh, I'm disowning everybody," I get the impulse, and especially if you're not, and they still talk to like some of the like slightly more racist people than them, and those people have relationships with the full-on rape, and that's how word of mouth is how we do this. Like again, Bernie Sanders, he activated more people politically than ever, and that's how the first thing oppression teaches you is that you have no fucking power. And you are liberated because you understand the power you have. You're just trying to figure out how to use it. And so all this stuff is like very radical shit that we're doing. And like
it feels like I've always felt like everybody does have a platform or a level of power, even if you don't have a position of authority or a like official title or whatever it is or money associated with it. I always feel like you have some kind of power in how you are. It's your inherent value is like there's something so much with prioritization in everything because I want I want to do it all now, and I don't know how to pick and choose. Like, sometimes my battles, I'm getting so much better since I've become a mother at like managing my own energy and schedule, but it's still like I want to be a part of all of it, and like I want to just clone myself a million times so I can be, because I feel like I need it to all. I want to do it all, and I don't. It's like I wanted to join every club on campus. Like I can't just sit and be at a place. I have to like be involved in everything, and so I don't know just how to prioritize, kind of like so what would you recommend for me as like I know that the free time I have is really like a couple of days a week. I have Jack's nap time that I don't already have, like therapy or acting class or rehearsal or something. So like during those little chunks of time, what things to do during those times.
I think conversations good. For me, I joined the Democratic Socialists of America. I think you're in LA, right? They have an LA chapter up there. Giving yourself an analysis about class is really important about this too, because class, like the reason that Black people, so do you know when the first white privilege happened, right? So this is a piece of history that they never taught. There used to be Black and white slaves. White racists love to bring up the fact that the Irish were slaves, right? They were.
Yeah.
In the 1700s, you can read it, Bacon's Rebellion, like bacon, the frying food or whatever.
Yeah.
So Bacon's Rebellion, the Black and white slaves united, went against their bosses or their slave owners and were like, fuck you, we want freedom. And they tried to break them, they were going to win. And then the slave owner came back and said, okay, wait. So we hear your cries. White slaves, you are now indentured servants. Once you work for me for 40 years, you get freedom. And Black slaves, y'all are Black. You're fucking slaves forever. And that was the fucking first white.
You give a little bit of power. It's like cops in that when they see a show enough.
Yeah. So,
Loreen, it seems like every time you just keep talking, and I'll just.
Oh my god.
So did you hear any of that?
It's great. I heard some of it. You were talking about when they see us and how when you get, and so that's right. So, like, white privilege was the pennies the crumbs that they gave to do what? Freedom. And instead they accepted 40 years of fucking slavery for freedom? And when they became free, did they get 40 acres and a mule? No. So, like, what the fuck, man? Like, that's what it's been since 1700, is nonstop white privilege oppressing both races, Black people more obviously in every case, but oppressing both. And so there's a great quote from this woman, or from this Aboriginal activist called Leela Watson, and it's called, "If you've come here to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you've come because your liberation is bound up with mine, let us work together." White people need to understand that they are oppressed by this system too. It's more obvious, very naked. But the thing is, how is it that white people are complicit with this? It's white privilege, and it's also systemic dehumanization. If it was your grandmother being pepper sprayed in the face and kicked in the face by a cop, there's no way in hell you would ever tolerate that. You would die before you slept a moment fighting for your fucking grandma who faced such a terrible injustice. But you accept it for someone Black. Why? Because we have this media, systemic racism, yada yada. And so you are capable of seeing past this because you radically humanize people. Mm-hmm. You don't, I don't know if you recognize it, but you have a humanity in you that other people do not. You see people's humanity in spite of this propaganda trying to tell you that you are different from them because of your choices, but you're not. They make the same choices as you. They are just more oppressed than you. And those are the reasons why they don't have the opportunities that you have. Like, it's like, we could go on for fucking another 3 hours about how, like, all the systems set up to elevate descendants of the white race and oppress the descendants of the Black race, all to favor the elite. So, like, white people have some crumbs. We have $100,000 in savings versus, like, $1,000 in savings for Black families, when the fruit of our labor is that we should fucking work 20 hours a week and be loving our children as they grow up instead of fucking working and not seeing them grow up. And you talk about like crime in these neighborhoods. White people only have to work 40 hours to have a living, which is still too much. But Black people and brown people, I have this guy who's a 60-year-old man who grew up in Pilsen. When he first came to Pilsen, you know what? A person came up to him with a suitcase full of cocaine and a gun and said, come back with this full of cash. And that happened in every American city in America, and we still haven't reconciled with that. Mm-hmm. Why was there crack? How did crack suddenly become ubiquitous in every American city? You know, all these things that we still don't know the truth about. And like Dave Chappelle has that joke about like, oh, AIDS crisis, huh? How is it that there's a disease that just kills all the people who have fun and that old white people hate? I don't know the conspiracy about that. I don't know how it worked and whatever, but like that AIDS wasn't addressed. Like, you know, there's COVID, at least we're like, had to stay home for a little bit before they sent. It's like, so all these systems, but like, but we're actually really close to freedom. Like having these conversations is what is the beginning of the end for them, which is why they're trying to shut us the fuck up and have us go back to work and stop talking about these protests.
So I'm 100% on board with talking and educating and having the hard conversations and like all that I feel like I can do. And I'm really curious about the psychology of the elite. And I know in the Being the Bastards podcast, they talk about how it really is just like someone's boss's boss. Like there's this, it started with everybody has their trauma that they then, you know, are afraid of, and they try to gain power and money so they don't have to feel that deeply connected compassion for someone so wildly different from us or exactly the same. And I feel very like I feel so compelled to somehow like deeply understand. It's like have you seen the show Succession? Mm-mm. Oh, it's kind of a nod to the Fox News empire, and I'll look it up. Media conglomerate, just people with like beautiful story of just people with crazy amounts of money and power, and those awful qualities you see that we all have. Like we all have all of that within us, and I feel just so fascinated by that like be power and seeing like because again like having very little actual power my whole life, I always felt very empowered to use everything I have up like a Native American skinning a cow. It's like I'm going to use it all as I can, and I can't imagine. I have such a hard time connecting to the idea of having an obscene amount of power and wealth and not using most of that and just maintaining like I'm fine with like a 2-bedroom apartment. Like you don't need all of this extra shit, and it doesn't make anybody happy. Like there's no real happiness level. And I just feel like there's like something that can get to them, like some sort of like healing that needs to happen to make them realize like you could just really make big shifts in all of this if you started to really care. And I know they do. I know deep down it exists. And so I feel like while I simultaneously want to be doing this work from the ground up, I feel this energy around like somehow connecting to the most elite. And like I think I thought this right when COVID started too. I was like they're comfortable in their and
mentioned joining Democratic Socialists of America, right? Because it's like we need clarity on our enemies. So during Byron, my husband's campaign, there were the heirs of Walmart personally spent over $100,000 to oppose his election to city council in Chicago.
Yeah.
They spent money to oppress me, my voice, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, unless, like, they say like liberalism is sexually transmitted, right? Unless and Jeff Bezos falls madly in love with you and wants to fuck you so badly that he will become a leftist in order to fuck you and give away his fortune. It's not going to happen. They are.
That is. I dated in like right after college. I dated this super wealthy guy, and like he lived in the executive suite of the Chase Park Plaza in St. Louis, and he was like he had all these businesses, and he was a part of all these. He loved Ayn Rand, and we just were so moral, just like we disagree entirely, and I can't understand. I was like, this relationship will never work. But what I should have done is like use my sexual power to like get him to come on my side. Like I should have been more wise at the young age and realized like, oh, I could really use this little crush he has to like make an actual difference.
There's conspiracy theories about why JFK and Marilyn Monroe. There are people higher than the president, right? Jeff Bezos is one of them. Like the guys who killed Jeffrey Epstein, like those people are higher than our politicians. Our politicians, all of them, are just puppets of the rich, except maybe JB Pritzker, who's like his own billionaire. That's what Trump was all about. He's like, I'm a billionaire. I'm the guy behind all these guys. So just elect me, man. And like, whatever. But so like the people behind there's only a very tiny number of people who hold power, and that's why like Ivanka Trump tries to pretend like she's a liberal, and that's why it's easy for her to pretend like she's liberal. Her actions are so bullshit. Like take cloth and kneel it. It's like, bitch, you are Speaker of the House. You can do whatever you want. You could you can change the world if you chose to, but you do not. Puppets, like she's the queen loyal puppet. Like Byron was telling me, like when in Ecuador, right? He was really aghast at like the poverty of Black and Indigenous people there, and there would be like the white people who are dicks to you, but then there'd be the mestizo people, like the half people, the tokens, who would like beat you, like they would beat their workers. They would beat you even harder just to prove their loyalty to the white man.
Yeah.
So like look, like those are people among us who are like some of the most insidious. Because like if we could get like these oppressor puppets out of our way, then there's nothing between us and chopping off the head of Marie Antoinette and the king, right? Yeah. Like that's what it takes. Like power sees nothing without a demand. Rich,
which is like the only revolution that ever succeeded, right?
Yeah.
I just heard about that too.
And then if you look at what happened in 2015 or whatever, or sometime under Obama's presidency, the Haitian women, Black women garment workers were organizing to get like 1 penny more or something for an hour for their labor manufacturing American garments. What did the State Department do under Hillary Clinton? She intervened to oppress the Haitian workers more, and she successfully blocked their revolution for better wages from American companies. That's what Hillary Clinton, the liberal, who's a feminist, who also does all this shit, did. She's fucking evil. Well, you ask, like, why did these celebrities not step out? There's a reason that, like Lupe Fiasco, right? Do you remember he was, like, a hip-hop artist or something? He made songs about Palestinian liberation, and he stopped getting record deals. You should watch... have you seen the Sam Cooke documentary on Netflix? You should watch that. Sam Cooke, Cooke. So we all, like, I'm, like, woke, right? But I didn't even fucking know how much of a civil rights leader Sam Cooke was. He was like the real version of like John Legend. John Legend likes to play that he's with us, but he's a fucking bootlicker, right? So like you gotta look for like bootlicker is a good term for these motherfuckers because they'll say like, oh, I'm liberal, I'm with you, But when John Legend, when it came to pass, he fucking endorsed Elizabeth Warren at Obama's request because they
so how do we then maybe that's a better question is the people that are performing, do they really...
We're frozen again. Our internet was so good for a minute.
Or with sociopaths, you can get through to them by making them fall in love. With the non-sociopaths who are just performing and just the puppets, how do we get... On one one hand, that's a way we can connect to a conservative that hates Hillary Clinton conversation where we agree, but it just feels like it's still so like calling Hillary Clinton evil, assuming she's not a sociopath and has truly decent intentions, but makes mistakes and is a performer, or John Legend, same thing, calling them bootlickers and calling them sociopaths and calling them things that maybe they aren't, like, just feels like it's just adding to this like fighting without making any progress. Or maybe the way to bond to somebody that really disagrees with us or thinks they do, because we could say, yeah, we both hate Hillary Clinton, so now let's talk from there. Calling people out for their flaws only works when you first greet them with this loving sort of like, you want what's best for the world, right? So do I. Let's talk about what that really is. Like, really trying to see what, at least that they're trying.
Yeah, it's like, it's not like I don't spend all day like shit talking Hillary Clinton. Like, but like if somebody were to say, oh, well, Hillary Clinton's like, you support Hillary and so you can't be on the side of justice. And like, Hillary is a counterfeit version of what justice should be. So like, right. Her place is really more to derail. Like nobody's quoting Hillary Clinton. Nobody's quoting John Legend. And like, that's why we quote, like, that's what history can do for you, is to give you clarity on who was really on your side. Because like right now, like even right now, like Barack Obama, nobody's quoting him.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's a disappointment for the ages. And, like we can sort of analyze that, but the truth is like we want having clarity on who like the upper echelon of like our class enemy is, right? The Walmart owners, Jeff Bezos, like, he performs like, and so that's the thing. Jeff Bezos owns the Washington Post, and they put out liberal media. They say Black Lives Matter, they say all this stuff, but what they'll censor and what NPR will censor is any stuff about actually the shift in power it will take to actually make Black Lives Matter. Not just fucking say it, but to make it matter. Make it so that one more black death in police custody or in fucking this poverty-induced gang violence is possible. Like, what are you gonna do to like to actually make Black Lives Matter? It will take labor standards being right, and so that's what like when you ask like where to prioritize your stuff, look in your world. Like if you work, talk to your coworkers about like, are you guys in a union? Like for example, my union started a decolonization and racial justice committee so that we can talk about the racism in our job with people who normally wouldn't think about that. There are white people at my job who are like, I don't know what to do. And I'm like, you don't have to be part of the committee if you don't have the time, but support what we're doing. When we ask you to sign a petition, when we ask you to do that, say that you're with us. Use your power to be with us. And that's how, like, we don't get Jeff Bezos.
It does feel like I've chosen I feel like local change, like in my own home and then in this apartment building that I live in, that feels like a very like tangible way that will, because I'm an actor, so I have like jobs here and there.
Right.
And I think eventually, like, if, as I have more credits and whatever, it will, on every set, I'll have, like I said, like, I'll figure out how to use the little bit of power I might be able to pretend I have to, like, actually move some shit around. But yeah, I think I think the clarity of the enemies is really great. Just a great thing to know. So it's the Walmart owners, Jeff Bezos. Who else really counts in that?
You can look at the people who you think like are really doing this work, right? Like so like you were saying, like start locally. They're focusing locally to oppress too, right? So like look at like if there was like a city council person who like was like a DSA, like look at the DSA endorsed candidates and look at who is giving their opponents money. The realtors, right? The Democrats and the realtors are the parents of gentrification, which is nothing but legalized colonization against people of color. They say, hey, we want your land now, move. And then they use institutional economic systems to force you to move. And so, like, that's been a very difficult, like, why has it taken so long for liberals to get clarity on, like, what gentrification really is? Because for so long, Democrats would gaslight us being like, oh, well, you just got to make more money. That's just the market. And it's like, fuck your market. Like, in fact,
Yeah.
Byron has a master's in economics. The reason he doesn't have a PhD in economics is because the gatekeepers to the School of Economics, he like during the economics like gating thing to be able to complete your dissertation, he came to a conclusion, but he came to it from a leftist perspective, and they said, you got the answer wrong. He's like, I got the exact number you got, but I came to it from a different equation because your assumptions are wrong, and your assumptions that like the people's labor is not a quantifiable value, or, whatever he did, they blocked him from getting, so he just has a master's in economics. He couldn't have finished his PhD. Those are institutions. So like if you look at like Lupe Fiasco, these people who are deep platforms, watch that Sam Cooke documentary, because you look at it, how the industry, who controls Hollywood, right? They always go Democrats, liberal Hollywood.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is? It's true. But Hollywood isn't liberating us. Hollywood's a racist place. They work hand in hand with the conservatives to oppress us. So they have the same bosses. Harvey Weinstein parties with Donald Trump. Like, all these people are friends behind Obama and Bush are like buddy now. Ellen, a fucking gay woman. You think like that's what this identity politics shit is like? Identity politics without a class analysis is bullshit. Ellen could be with us, but she's financially invested in the status quo now because she's like the dating clown, right? She keeps that's what this whole celebrity culture, and that's why this revolution is dismantling celebrity culture, right? People were all about sucking Kim Kardashian's dick until it was like, oh shit, I got my real problems I got to focus on. And it's the job of the jesters, Hollywood, to keep the people distracted so that they focus on whose outfit is what and blah 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 and all these fucking drama instead of focusing on, oh shit, like my neighbor got evicted and my community's being like eviction, like gentrification fuels gang violence. There's you had grannies on the block who can keep the boys in check who are like getting rowdy. If you're all the old parent, like if all the Sam Howards are fucking having to go work 50 jobs to feed their kids, but you got Granny on the block who can keep an eye on all her little nephews, but then she gets evicted, then who's there watching the kids? And then you've got the fucking guy who has the suitcase full of drugs who's like, hey buddy, looks like you're not getting any money. You can get some if you sell these drugs, and there's no one there to watch that, and then you fucking jail. And then who owns the jails? Who profited when they fucking fill up? We have more people in jail than communist China by like multiple levels, even though they have 4 times the population. They have 1 billion people, and we got more people in jail. 1 in 3 black men in America today, in the movie The 13th, touch the criminal justice system. 1 in 3.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, it's 1 in 17 for white men.
Yeah.
Which is so crazy, and it's not meant to rehabilitate. It's meant to extract profit. And then look at all these companies who make profit from prison labor. It's legalized slavery. And so here's the thing. Once you realize that Black Lives Matter, every institution is discredited because every institution is a white institution, which is why we are revolution and we will win. Because we have found the clarity. Black Lives Matter. Therefore, everything must burn, and we will rise from the. So if we go back to the police thing, the police are part of that fucked up system, and so once we demolish that system, then we can have a system that invests in education, so that these fucking cops can go back and become tradesmen or become here's the thing. Here's the root of it, right? Look at how much work is needed in our society. We got fucking tons of people with dementia and all these diseases. No one's there to take care of them, right? Every nursing home's understaffed because they're owned by for-profit people. In Illinois, all the mobile home parks are owned by a billionaire who raises the rent on these motherfuckers, and he's donating to all these political campaigns left and right. Why? So he can maintain power and oppress the poorest of the poor. Why? To keep them all fucking competing for crumbs. And once we have this clarity that it's like, oh shit, like the mobile home dwellers in rural Illinois are oppressed by the same motherfucker who's oppressing the guys in the hood. That's what Charles Booker's campaign in Kentucky was all about. And he almost won if they hadn't fucking stole it from him. And who stole it from him? Charles Booker. Cory Booker is a liberal sellout. But Charles Booker is? Oh yeah.
Really?
Yeah. That's why you gotta get Kamala Harris is trash. Everybody who has a platform to get in front of you has sold out to get that platform from the rich.
Yeah.
Cory Booker is the king of privatizing public education.
Yeah.
And that's Walmart's number 1 priority. They funnel it through this group called INCS in Illinois, at least, to privatize public education. And that's what happened with we used to have public housing in this country. What did they do? They defunded it. They devalued. They cut security. They allowed crime. Crime is a choice. All these talk about crime. Crime is a choice by the elite. They put together people in poverty. They starve them of resources that are right there for the taking. Yeah, NPR is trash. Don't listen to NPR. Go read The Intercept. The Intercept. The Intercept. Intercept is The one I can think of off the top of my head. We can sort of look at examples, and I can more say this is shit, this is not. And you can still listen. You can still read NPR to see what's going on. But even look at Sinclair Broadcasting. That's the group that owns all. They bought up all the local affiliates. So that if you go on YouTube and look up Sinclair or something, you'll see that when there was some uprising back in the Occupy Wall Street days or something. Half the local channels in America were repeating the same talking points from the same billionaire. And so all the people who if you become a broadcast journalist, you sold out to that shit. And and so NPR is definitely owned by the 1%. You can look at your local news, Black Club Chicago is a good one that's local, Chicago. Look at your alternative weeklies and stuff like that. The ones that are your local paper's about to be a fucking sellout. We need to think about if you look at Mr. Rogers, he gave a speech about the need for public funding for PBS a generation ago. And that's why we had good TV at the beginning of history. That's why a guy like Mr. Rogers was able to thrive. He was the most anti-racist people,
But actually still not consistent. I think because that's where I truly don't think that I'm what's the Malcolm X thing, the wolf in
well, there's the wolf who's the conservative, and then the fox who smiles at you and tells you to watch out for the wolf, and then who's the one who ends up with the lamb on his plate for dinner? The fox. So
what am I?
You are the oppressed trying to figure out how to liberate yourself. You are not the Democratic elite. When I say Democrats or Republicans, I'm talking about the decision makers, the powerful people in that party who can say, let's say you ran for council. You'll find out who your fucking enemies are real fast, And the people who would lose money because you're a real person. Those are the people. And that's why it's so hard to if you electoral politics is one way, but if you see with these protests, what were the first thing they were doing? They were calling these people criminals. It was all over TV when there was violence, when they were burning cars, which was amazing. But once they stopped burning cars and stopped looting and all that, it's not covered in the media anymore. You only see that it's still going out from your friends who share it. But if you don't have friends who are in the streets, unless they're banging pots outside your window, you're not going to hear about it. And there's a reason they're not going to hear about it, because when you can change the conversation, you already have won. Because here's the thing, we are right. It's not there's two sides of this. No, we're correct. You are oppressing our voice. We're the change that we want is the correct path for history. You are stopping the inevitable, and we are hoping to be the generation who finally. If you watch the Sam Cooke documentary, that's what was so, I was, depressed a little bit after I watched. I was depressed before, but most of the time I'm actually, one of my most, if you're trying to be optimistic, I'm the person to come to, because I generally am pretty optimistic about this shit, because I see the fucking path. I'm the Matrix. I'm fucking see the enemies. I see what they're fucking doing, and I see, fuck you guys.
Yeah, it's have test mind, and you're able to, but I don't have that mind. I'm a very,
You're close to it. You're closer because you know who the enemy is.
Yeah. Well, I still don't know. So I think maybe this is the advertising marketing background in me that really or what, I don't know what it is in me, but I feel like I want to give simple ways for people who don't have the time to watch and read everything that you've made time to consume. But it truly feels like that isn't going to do it. I think I used to believe that if everybody just did a little bit to help the world be better, just did little small things, then it would make a collectively massive difference. But what it really feels like the more I learn is that it has to be very radical for it to be productive. And truly progressive, for there really be change and not just these performing looking changes, so like feel good kind of surface level stuff. So I still don't have I'm not sitting in that yet. And I still don't quite know my place and what to tell people who are busier than I am to like how you can kind of like chip away at the problem. And I don't know still how to focus, I guess. It feels like the more I learn, the less focused I become. And the more I'm like, I just have to give up everything. Like, my impulse is very much like, I have to just like peace out on Michael and Jack. Michael can raise him for a while I go like fucking burn shit down and like I just be in the streets all the time shouting from the rooftops, all of these, like I don't know how to find that balance. And I think part of that is I have like just kind of manic personality, so I don't know how to tame my.
I think it's more like a magic eye. Like, you've done those, right? So it's like you haven't done the magic eye where you're like, you go in and then you go out and you finally see the photo?
Oh, yeah, I've done that. Yeah.
So it's like that. Like, everything seems blurry until one day it's just like,
yeah.
So you're closer than you think. Like, it's all about, like, if you're getting involved locally, like, look at, like, your building complex, right? Like, who's your, like, let's say you keep doing this chalk thing, right? You keep doing this chalk thing, and your landlord can just let you keep doing it, or they can evict you or something, right?
I love your recommendations, which basically says, like, I've had a pretty good experience here, like, I'm enjoying raising my child here, and I want that for everyone. Like, I want everyone to be able to have that, and Elite Management owns 29 buildings, or they manage 29 buildings in the Los Angeles area. So if we can come up with some sort of like community system that really works to combat racism and like combat any sort of like keeping the marginalized communities down, if we can do that in our little 20 unit community, and we can come up with some kind of structure and format that really does work, we could apply that to all 29 buildings they manage, and then they could apply that and recommend that to other building management companies in the area, and it could just keep expanding. If we feel welcome and comfortable, and like they have neighbors that they can rely on, and just this community is everything. So I think if we can create that community here, and so with the Black Lives Matter talk, I understand. A friend of mine did Sesame Street chalk, and she got in trouble and had to hose it down herself, actually. So I'm willing to see the side of like it's just the fact that it's chalk. It's not the message. But given that, I will, in the meantime, until I see some change, I'll keep chalking with the understanding that you will keep hosing it down because I think this message is important. But what I would like to see is a more permanent symbol of Black Lives Matter support. Something that if a cop does enter this building, or a black person, or any person enters this building, they know that black bodies are cherished and protected here in this space. So even subconsciously, if it will affect them, I hope in some way. So I feel like those kinds of changes feel like in line with what I can do and like what could make actual tangible progress. But then I feel like, from that Malcolm X video again, concerned that I'm like taking on backlash is not on me, because if they've never told me I would be evicted if I keep talking. They never even really asked me to take it down. They just said they're going to take it down if I do it again, basically. So far I don't have any legal consequences, or like I'm not putting my family in danger, and I haven't been put in danger. I've had some conflicts with neighbors, but I can handle those conflicts. But the real danger is 3 of my black neighbors, almost right after this kind of stuff happened, they started getting nonstop noise complaints, which is like, they're 3 young chalk thing happened. So that's one backlash they're getting. Their TV, their apartment was broken into and their TV was bashed in. Nothing was stolen, just the TV bashed in. So like somebody's trying to send a message. And then just the emotional feeling of like seeing that chalk and seeing that message and then seeing it hosed down so many times, like, that has to be a little bit heartbreaking every time, because it's like, you know, like, they know that there's racist in their community and they feel it, but they didn't have to, like, have it shoved in their face. So I think I just feel this, like, I'm trying to do something that I think could really make things better, but in the meantime, it's only fucking the people that I'm trying to help. And so I feel this, like, just constant crisis of, like, I mean, of everything, but in this small sort of effort, I feel like those specific worries. And then I've tried to involve them, but they're very busy people, and they're doing things outside of our community, and there's not, like, the same, when you're a young like guy or whatever, you're not thinking of this apartment, and, like, you're not raising a kid, you're not thinking about this as, like, home as much as you know, because they're looking for another apartment, and, like, they're just kind of, this isn't as much of a home to them as I've always made, like, wherever I live, like, I felt like it's my home for at least that time, so I really try to, like, embody it and, like, be a part of the community. Take locally.
I think that, like, we need to build institutions, right? Because there are no institutions for ending white supremacy. And so, like, for me, Democratic Socialism of America has been a good fit, and I think it might be a good fit for you, particularly because it's dominated by white people who are trying to figure it out. There are other organizations that are, like, Black-led and that type of thing, but a lot of times they're not Black-led to be teachers to white people who want to tag along. And Democratic Socialists of America is a good place to sort of, they have activities all the time. They have lots of, like, especially now with COVID, they're doing a ton of online workshops. Like, in Chicago, like, Chicago DSA is very, like, you know, because I mean, New York DSA just elected a bunch of Congress people, so it's, like, amazing. But, like, we elected a bunch of socialists to our city council, and so, like, we're very fortunate that we've built these institutions for ourselves. Here's the great thing. There's the nonprofit industrial complex, which is a dominated space by liberals, right? Which is, like, you're not really, like, let's say you have a housing organization, right? You're not really there to challenge the power structure in which housing is a commodity that isn't a human right. You're just there to sort of fill in the patches where injustice happens. Oh, someone's getting evicted. Let's try to get a lawyer towards the revolution that we need. Meanwhile, there's 80,000 people homeless, and we are not doing anything to systemically solve that because we have no power. We're funded by donations. But DSA is funded by dues, and that's the same as a union. Unions are funded by member dues, meaning they're only accountable to the people who give them money, which is the members. So here's the thing, though. Liberal Democrats have very much co-opted the union movement. So you'll see a lot of these unions who are actually corrupt unions. So, like, that's all. We need so much change. That's part of it. So Democratic Socialists of America continues to be, like, so far not entirely corrupted and just trying to have people. So they'll have what Democratic Socialists of America in Chicago has is these. So depending on your particular interest, you can go. There's a housing working group. There's an electoral working group if you want to work on local elections. There's a political education group where you can get together and do readings and discuss them and learn about what's the next step to do. There's all these different things, and then you get tagged into, like, the greater priorities of the organization. So while you're having your friendships and making relationships with people who know this stuff or are trying to learn this stuff, you also have an organization that's telling you, hey, this week it's important to pay attention to this. This week it's good to call your mayor about this. This week it's good to do this. And then you can start to you start to get a better sense of, like, what's going on in your community, who's the players, and who's doing the right thing and who's doing the wrong thing. So that when election time comes around, it's not just like, oh, a bunch of Democrats who are like, oh, I believe in social justice. No, I believe in social justice. No, I believe in social justice. You go, well, only one of those guys isn't taking money from Walmart, so that's the only guy I'm going to fight for. Because these other two are saying that they're with me, but they're actually taking a bunch of money from people who made a ton of money putting, charter schools and everything. That was, like, a huge thing with the Obama administration. They were all about these charter schools, which is what Betsy DeVos is doing. So they're all, like, it's all the same shit, but here's the thing, like, Republicans will just, like, fuck you to your face, and Democrats will gaslight and be like, oh, I believe in hope and change, and oh, I'm so great. And by the way, I made Arnie Duncan my Secretary of Education, who's, like, the number one
is there any chance that Obama still has the right values and the right goals, and he's just taking the money because it's like, why not take their money? But like not actually, like he's screwing them over, but tricking them. Like, is it possible? Just the way, like, I might be I'm still mixing this up, but I'm going to use the one of this instead of Malcolm X one because they're similar. But in the Bible they talk about like being a sheep in wolves, or a wolf in sheep's clothing. So is it possible that he's a wolf in sheep's clothing if a wolf in this instant is or a fox or whatever is the good guys, but he's trying to convince, like, it feels a little, I thought I was being like kind of sneaky, was to show anybody who's following that hashtag, that Blue Lives Matter hashtag, so they are looking for more people who support what they believe in. I wanted to show those people that, hey, come for the police, for your husband and your uncle, like, that's a problem for both of them. So if you follow this hashtag and you see that I also support Black Lives Matter, maybe you'll see that you can do both too. But it feels like there is none of that. Like, we're being forced in every way to divide, and we're just calling everybody out, and it feels like at some point somebody's gonna sell out because we're all flawed out. Everyone's an enemy. Like, it doesn't feel like there ever is any true opportunity for solidarity and progress still. Does that
Okay.
feel?
Yeah, I totally get that perspective. So with the Blue Lives Matter thing, have you heard people say, like, well, Black Lives Matter doesn't mean white lives don't? Have you heard people say that?
Yeah.
So that's actually not true. So whiteness is a political construct, right? Like, you and I have the same color skin, but I'm not white because I'm Asian, right? And Asians occupy this very crazy space in, like, white, black, white. So in the United States, like, we have a binary where it's whiteness and blackness, right? And every Latinos and Asians and indigenous, like, it occupy this weirdo middle space where we're oppressed but we're not. So when you say, like, the construct of whiteness, when we talk about the invention of the white race in the 1700s, it made, like, whiteness tells you to forget your actual heritage. Like, you're not Irish, you're not Polish, you're not German, you're not English, you're white. And what that does is takes away a culture from you. Because a lot of people who are immigrants, like, the German was the most spoken language in the United States outside of English until World War II, when people had to stop teaching their children German so that they wouldn't, like, be part of the Nazi thing or whatever.
Yeah.
So, but people,
I don't know if I don't know if I've officially followed this yet, because I know, like, I have a lot of German in me and a lot of Irish, and every part of me that's German and Irish and English, like, we care about those roots. Like we celebrate Oktoberfest in my mom's side of the family. Like, it's crazy people. Like, that's the great time of our life. And every Irish person I've ever met still drinks and feels the, like, you know, the snake thing and the whole, like, you feel it.
So Irish people will celebrate what's taught to them as their culture, drinking, leprechaun. But they don't actually know actual heritage as, like, a resistance against the English. They don't know the, like, class heritage of it. Why? They don't know why the Irish, like, ask an Irish person, why rich, and then there was none left for the poor. And so the Irish had to come here as an impoverished, as refugees. Just like they had to, like, economic refugee, like my husband's an economic refugee from Ecuador. Like, they were economic refugees from class oppression in Ireland, and they came here, and then what? They were taught that, like, there's a book called How the Irish Became White by Noel Ignatieff, and it talks about how you come here with your heritage of, like, German or Irish and, you know, Polish. In my case, I'm half Polish, and then you become white. And so if you look at what was the largest mass lynching in the United States, it was, like, in the late 1800s against 17 Italian Americans. And that's before Italians were white. Italians were just as treated as derogatorily as, black people. And that's because whiteness as a political and systemic and institutional construct is the only part of white culture is participation in anti-blackness. So that's why Black Lives Matter is such a threatening thing for white supremacists to hear. Whiteness is a construct. It doesn't mean, I have white skin, but I'm not white. It's like, it's a political construct. It is nothing but a political construct. And you can sort of learn a little bit about it in that Jane lady, Jane Seymour or something. It's the blue eye, brown eye experiment. Look that up. Jane, I forget her last name, but it's Jane. It's this white lady with short hair, and she does the blue eye, brown eye experiment. And she did it on Oprah. And Oprah's kind of a sellout too, but she do that one good thing. And Oprah's an interesting story too. But this Jane lady does this thing. White skin is this political construct. The invention of the white race was that's a good one. That's where a lot of how the Irish became white has a lot of research from the invention of the white race. So whiteness, at the root of it, it's not like, oh, I'm European or anything. It's that I participate in anti-blackness. So those Columbus statues are a very big part of this. So when did those Columbus statues, if you look up the history of when Columbus became a thing, it wasn't until the same time as the rise of Jim Crow. He became the path for Italian Americans to become part of anti-blackness. Italians were in solidarity with black people, black communities in the past. When they elevated Christopher Columbus as an American hero, just 100 years ago, that's when Italian Americans became white privileged. And
was this all really just sociopaths playing chess and figuring out how to fuck people over, or was it a series of unfortunate events because we're all super flawed, and when we get more power and money, we want more power and money, and we're never satisfied with what we have, and it was really building this model of this is how I want to fuck the rest of the black people and blackness forever. Is it really that intentional, or is it because it feels like if it was that intentional, then it feels more clear. You just shoot the bad guy. You really can't. But it feels like good and evil aren't that clear from my perspective. All kind of a muck. I don't know how to.
There are the leaders of this, the people who were orchestrating it, who were moving the chess pieces, and then the majority of the people who went along with it were just followers. They don't have enough, and that's the thing. During this time of Jim Crow and we were having a labor movement too. So there was a labor movement that was rising also, and it coincides because what's the best way to break a strike? Racial division. That's how they've oppressed labor for so long, is because of racism. So classism and racism are inextricably linked, and sexism too, with the oppression of the mothers, and we talked about that. And the reason that we need to learn about all these things is because they work together. So it is a master chess game. So the Italians, they were look, Italians, if you keep working in South, because there were white people who were oh, we can't hurt the little Italians, I'm German, and then we're friends with Italians. So Italians had more humanity in the eyes of white people than black people, right? But if the Italians are saying, hey, black people, you're just like us, then white people are going to start being well, if Italians are just like blacks, then blacks are just like me, and we should be a unified rainbow family. And we can't have that if we want to have oppression and 1% and the elite and capitalism. So it's, sell out Italian American leaders accepted, and it wasn't even necessarily harmful. It was Italian Americans wanted Christopher Columbus, and at the time, I guess the history of his treason was his genocide wasn't really taught very much. So a lot of people who learned Columbus was like a real dude was like, they didn't learn that he stabbed babies out of pregnant indigenous women's stomachs. So they didn't know that they were buying into that, but they went along with it. And now we are living with the consequences of actually the whole truth that they inadvertently accepted, some of them. You know, like they could have said, oh, like we have other leaders, Antonio, like there are plenty of Italian Americans who have done a great, the process of like Italian Americans and Irish Americans becoming white was like, so you can still like, people still have superficial understanding of their heritage, but they actually don't understand their real, like, you know, Italians didn't really do much oppressing, and Irish didn't really do much oppressing, and Polish didn't really do much oppressing, and yet those are some of the people that are most, like, some of those members of those communities are most loyal to whiteness. And how was it? Like, it's
like they turned a bunch in Boston, they turned a bunch of Irish men into Irish cops, and so they became.
Yeah, someone was just saying that in the comments. Like, that's how. So when we talk about, so that's how I was talking about, like, Black Lives Matter really does mean white lives don't, because whiteness is a political construct. It doesn't mean people of European heritage don't matter, but it does mean that your whole cultural identity of being loyal to anti-blackness is a fucking farce. Yeah. And so the same thing with the Blue Lives Matter thing. Blue lives, first of all, don't exist. And the thing is, police are that oppressive institution. And so anybody could be a good person. But if you join an oppressive institution, just like all Americans are great people, right? Great people. But we participate in an oppressive system where we vote. And even though we voted for Hillary, and she's the good one, we still participated in a system that, and now I think the world is seeing, like, we are oppressed. The reason that we had only Hillary and Trump to choose from, two oppressors of different flavors, shows that we didn't have the power to, like, Bernie really would have been a liberating force because he's not loyal to anything. He might be, like, have some compromises just because he's an old man. But part of, like, what inspired me about him was, like, I think he's really connected to his Jewish heritage. There's a reason that Hitler was killing. Who did Hitler, you remember that poem that they had? First they came for the socialists, and I didn't speak up. Then they came for the trade union, and I didn't speak up. Then they came for the Jews, and I didn't speak up. And then they came for me, and no, that.
Yeah.
The reason that, like, they came for socialists first because the leftists are the ones who openly fight the fascists. We're the ones fucking saying we're Antifa even though they're trying to oppress us for that. Then we say, oh, the trade unionists. Unions understand because and the importance of black and brown workers and black, white, and brown workers standing together against the boss to get what they want, to get their health insurance, to get better working conditions, yada yada. And then the reason they were so concentrated in Poland was because Poland was the first constitutional democracy in Europe. Like, it was America, the first constitution. Second constitution in the world, Poland, which was a voluntary, like, a king was like, let's be a constitution, republic, instead of being a monarchy. And then what did they do? They fucking partitioned the shit out of Poland, and then they killed the Jews later on. And so the Jewish people have, like, that heritage of, like, standing with the oppressed, which is why Hitler needed to kill them in order to fucking be a fucking fascist. Like, the Jews would have stopped him, which is why he had to stop them. And if you look at Sam Cooke, like, why did they kill Sam Cooke? Because he had the power to stop them. And so, like, that's when I say, like, remember your heritage, I'm saying, like, learn the real rebellious history. And we all participate in capitalism.
What it sounds like is that every institution, every heritage, every human body has we have a lot of good stuff that happened, but we're all fucked. We've all been traumatized and abused, and we've been the bullies, and we've been bullied, and we've been oppressed and the oppressors. And so now we're at this time where we're the adults and we get to change history. It feels like we're just going to keep repeating history. Like, I feel like end up fucking somebody with a different color skin or a slightly different, like, because eventually we're all going to fuck each other anyway, and I'll be a little bit brown. Like, that's probably, hopefully, where we get. But we're going to find things, money, and whatever it is, skills, we're going to find reasons to hate each other. And it feels like we have to start with like some level of forgiveness and some like just easiness with each other, where like if you make a mistake in your rhetoric, or you like always like the cure, it's like when I worked in advertising and I was a boss. Like I had two people that were like my search analysts that I was training, and I remember my boss telling me, if I don't know something about search engine marketing, then I need to just pretend like I do, and like don't let them know I don't know, because they need to trust me that I'm their leader and that I know what I'm talking about. And I was just like, Brian, no, there's no way in my life that I would lead like that, because I'm a human person, and the value that I could give these people I'm training to let's say like, hey, I don't know the answer, let's figure it out together, like that is more valuable than me faking like I'm some kind of smarter person than I am and know everything person in this ever evolving servant leadership, like really forgiving people and trying to see what's best in them and working together as much as we can, and like picking our battles, and not like it feels like there's just so much hate being spewed because everybody's fucked up. We're all so broken and we're all in so much pain because we're holding on our DNA all of the times we've been oppressed that we may or may not fully know, but we know somewhere in our bodies, we know that. We know that we're in pain and we're hurting. And whenever we act out for somebody else or don't stand up for the right thing, it's because we feel a weakness and a sort of like, well, nobody stood up for me and all of these things. And I just feel like I can't add to that narrative. Like I can't keep doing that. I have to do something more, not fake positive, like it's sincere. Yeah. We have to meet each other with love and healing and like forgiveness and all of the like bullshit stuff that feels so foofy and maybe like yogi and meditative and all of it, but there has to be some level of that. I think if we're ever going to make change, that doesn't just end up in the same place 30, 40 years from now with different people being oppressed and oppressors. It's like, what do we do with that?
We
like,
almost racism back then in the 60s. Why did it stop? Because they murdered everybody who was leading the movement, and then they co-opted it, and then Reagan got in power and all that shit. So this time, so that was like the end. That was like the beginning of dark time. That was like, how they had like what is fucking God? After the Civil War, not reconciliation,
reconstruction.
Whatever, Reconstruction. Yeah. So they had Reconstruction, and then it was Jim Crow rising up to crush Reconstruction. So the Civil Rights Movement was killed, and then they rose up with the Reagan bullshit. Neoliberalism, neocolonialization. Oppression doesn't eliminate, it just, evolves. And so now that a huge piece of shit, like the boomers or something, but the Generation Z is the one that has clarity in this. Because unlike us, they're learning all this woke
college kids, right?
They're like the ones who were born, like the internet was always in their life. They were born in like 2000 or something.
Okay.
And beyond. So like college kids and teenagers still. Like they're still in high school and middle school, like Generation Z. They all know this shit. Like they're the kids that are marching in the streets in Chicago, a lot of them are like 15.
Yeah.
And here's the thing, the reason it's always the youth that lead the revolution. Like we are old. We were the first ones to sort of feel the effects of Reaganism, right? We were the ones that had DARE in high school and all that. Like, think how many resources, right? So we come out of this and we're like, this is fucked up, and we're voting for Bernie, and we're like leftists and stuff. But Generation Z is like seeing what happened to us, and a ton of us still can't even buy a house or afford to have a fucking kid, and our fucking ovaries are rotten. And they're like, fuck that, not for me. And that's why they're out there burning shit down. And so, they've seen this shit in the age when it matters. Like, when we learn this shit when we're old,
you know, we have institutions, and that's the thing, we're like wedded to these institutions, but the young people are like, burn it down.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so then it's
like listening to the youth, because they have, frankly, the most time to dedicate and the most sort of ideological, like when I was in college, high school, like that's when I felt the most clarity. But what adults don't, like where adults struggle to see that they should really be leading the fucking world, is because the youth has yet to be completely responsible for the day-to-day, because they haven't yet sold out to the man, and just, so there's like this, understandably so, this sort of like, this is all theory when you're young. It's all, and it makes it felt like, in college, I felt like I had so much clarity about myself as an activist, and just this, it all felt, yes, so clear, and there was always a real way for me to make change, and very little risk to me, right? Like I really could, I could give up my life for a good cause, and it wouldn't have been me now having a kid and a like, you know, him needing a mom and all of that life. So it's like, I don't know. I feel like those, yeah, I don't know what I'm saying, but I just know that it's.
No, I hear that. Like, but the thing is, like, things are so bad right now that like a ton of these Chicago public school students, a lot of them are missing school because they're working right now, like able to legally. And so, like, these kids do know what the stakes are. They've seen their friends murdered, and like they're like every teacher I know in the city of Chicago who's worked here long enough, who works in with Black and brown students, have had students murdered already. And so when you see, like, if you look at, like, this was, like, from research 10 years ago that I heard of it, like, Black kids, like, a lot of them who, like, grow up in these hyper-violent areas where, like, they love people that have been killed by gun violence, they don't see themselves living to old age. They go, I'm probably going to get shot next year, 5 years from now, who the fuck knows? And so coupling that with every other thing that impacts you with poverty and your health and all that, you're going to be like, fuck it. And so a lot of these kids are righteous in doing that. And what we see is the oppressed Chicago, because we're the most fucked up example right now. LA is defunding police. LA is defunding police. New York's defunding police. Chicago is not defunding police. And that's because we are, even like when they say a city is corrupt, what they mean is the people are oppressed. Chicago has some of the most oppressed people in the fucking world. And so what we have is in LA, hey baby, in LA and in New York, the people are crying out and their elected leaders are hearing them to some degree. Here, they're not hearing them. So we have to make an even louder demand, cultivate even more power to have a democratic voice in what's being done with our tax dollar resources. And so, like, the young people are sort of driving that. And then for us to have, it's like, you know, it's not so much like you don't really, all these people who are listening to Candace Owens and all that stuff in your life, they're a minority. At some sort of organized people who agree with you. So that's like that's at a certain point, keep working on the people you think you can get to, but you should also say that. So you can keep working on the people like all about Blue Lives Matter and stuff like that, and I think you should, because you have a relationship with them where they listen to you, where they wouldn't listen to me. But part of your time should also be spent organizing with people who agree with you. That's a really important part of building power. So it's not like convincing the people who disagree, like breaking the racism and people who disagree with us, super important. But even more important is more powerful together than we are as two individuals, right? Right. And so, like, when you join, I'm going to send you the link to join Democratic Socialists in LA. Like, when you organize with them, you can actually change the world. And then the people who disagree with you are just going to have to follow you, because you were the leader who organized and made the change. You elected a city council member. You elected a mayor who's now defunding the budget, investing in ending poverty, And then 5 years from now, everyone could ride bikes and play basketball wherever the fuck they want, and there's no crime because we've ended inequality, which is what the driver of crime is. Oh, I didn't hear you.
Like, let's just property. I've never felt, anytime I've been a part of a group, like a sketch comedy team, or whatever it might have been, I've never, or club, or any group, I have never, ever fully agreed with every single person, or with the group mind. Like, I'm a very classic American. People from different cliques and different groups and different clubs and different improv troupes and all of these things that, like, do really, I feel this, like, this, even if we disagree on some levels, there's this deeper, like, the kind of goop that makes us what we are, our connection, and that's the people that, like, that I want to be working with. But I feel like when there's already a group established, it is inherently going to be something that I can't fully get behind. So there's this stop-start kind of feeling with me sometimes with groups that already exist, like the Democratic Socialists of America. I'll join and find that they're checking every box, and I keep feeling the same, like, the resonance that works with me. But usually I'm like, I don't like the way you do that, and it's this, like, can I sacrifice, like, us not agreeing on A, B, and C because D is so important?
And I think that's so totally righteous. And, like, what I did, so, like, Trump got elected, the vote was in November of 2016, doing nonprofit shit, but I wasn't really doing a lot of, like, real organizing. So after he got elected, I realized I have to do more. So I kind of shopped around to different groups. I shopped around with Swing Left, all these other leftist groups, or liberal groups or whatever. And then finally when I got to DSA, the reason I joined them was because they were like, it was just like a small group of people, and we were like, hey, we want to just start talking about all these problems, and, like, who's got an idea to, like, do something about this? And someone would be like, let's do a march, or let's talk to this elected official, or let's work on this campaign. And everyone would be like, yeah. And so it was a group of people who wanted to act. That was what we had in common. And we had a socialist analysis. So we knew that capitalism was a problem. And so some people who are, like, crazy Marxists, read all the theory and all that shit, I haven't really read a lot of that stuff. I came to socialism through anti-racism. A lot of people come to socialism through class, because, like, a lot of white people come to socialism through class. You're probably going to come to it more from racism because, like, class wasn't really a huge problem for you necessarily, but racism is something that very much violates your values. And so you can sort of look around to see what are groups who are working on this type of thing. And so, like, a lot of, like, Jewish friends I know, like, do a lot of work in, like, Jewish leftist organizations, because there's, like, a cultural heritage that they all dig into collectively, which is where their action springs from. DSA, like, has this democratic decision. It's a democratic organization, so they're very radically democratic, where they don't, because they know it's a volunteer-run organization, so they can't. We're all socialists, and we all, like, want there to be, like, a good life for all workers in America. And then they democratically make decisions and debate and argue for better things. And different chapters have different problems. Like in Philadelphia and, like, Austin, Texas, sometimes they've had, like, big blowouts where, like, they broke into factions. But, like, that's a big history of the left. If you look at, like, FBI infiltrating, like, the FBI sent letters to Martin Luther King telling him to kill himself, and then they eventually killed him. That's how hard they work to break the left, because that's how much of a danger the left is to the movement, to the way. Stop around, follow their pages, look at what they're, and look at the people who are, like, they're running for council, or if they're working on a campaign. That's really how people get brought in, is because, they're doing this campaign about talking, or something that's very passionate to you. They probably have a socialist feminist group where they talk about the cost of motherhood and how it should be compensated and all that stuff. And, you can pick the issue that's very passionate to you, and you join that campaign, you get brought into a bigger group, and then you can sort of just find that you're in this community where, again, you don't agree with everything, but on the big picture, you do. And it'll take time. Like, I don't think you you should adjust that with like who you are as a person, because part of like, again, like your humanity is something that's very special about you and what makes you a good leader. And so you have to listen to yourself as you go forth, because if you just do what I say, or you just do what the culture is saying, then you're not going to be a leader. You're just a follower. And you initiated this conversation, and you're doing all this work, like agitating and learning in public because you are a leader. And I really think you should see yourself as that, because, you know, there are puppets who are in places of high power who are there because they are followers. And then there are leaders who we never learn their names because they were such effective leaders that they knew, like Fred Hampton. They killed him when he was 21 because he was such an effective leader that they had to take him out. And so, like, keep learning, keep listening to yourself. There's like a huge campaign in LA about like getting cops out of schools. I don't know if you've been successful with it yet, but like, you know, that's a big campaign that a lot of people are getting, because police in schools are huge school prison pipeline for Black children. And so, you know,
I gotta go because my baby is.
Yeah.
But this was everything, so informative, and yeah, just the tip of the iceberg. So thank you. I love you.